Our speaker today, we found out about because he, I guess, went to our meetup site and saw that we were a group that might be interested in his story and his book. So he sent us an email, and so we arranged for him to speak today as a result of him contacting us. So thanks for contacting us. I'll just read the summary here. The name of his book is, and the name of his talk is Dark Deception. Lawrence Pratt will discuss his recent novel, Dark Deception, which deals with the struggle of the individual against tribal pressure to conform and obey when the individual mind wants to choose another path. Dark Deception is a fictional adaptation of the events that led the author and his wife from dedicated members of an authoritarian faith to complete atheism, and could easily be subtitled, How Religion Turned Us to Atheism. So please give a warm welcome to Lawrence Pratt.
Okay, I think I'm good audio-wise, and before I do anything else, I've been asked to request that if anyone has a question, please raise your hand, and the person who is handling the mic will make sure the mic gets to you, Laura, and then that way your question will be picked up by the recording here. Otherwise, it just comes back as echoing aimlessly through the room. So. That said, I do want to thank everyone for hosting me here today. Looking out here, I'm thoroughly convinced what everyone says is true. Public speaking is the most terrifying experience an individual can have. Every time I get up and start to talk, as we get closer and closer, I get more and more jittery. My wife, Michaela, says, go get him, go out. So yeah, here I am. But anyway, my presentation is essentially about our journey from lukewarm Catholics to devout Mormons, back to being lukewarm Catholics, and then into the ranks of the non-believers. Fortunately for both of us, we were always on the same page when it came to our religious affiliation, and that helped reduce, and in fact eliminate a lot of conflict that a lot of other couples endure in such manners. However, what happened was it was about a 20-year journey through these various cycles, and finally becoming essentially atheists, non-believers, if you will. And although we had reached that point, the little voices in my head regarding particularly Mormonism, because it was such an intense experience, they just would not shut up. The brain just wouldn't turn off for me. And so while it is fictional, technically fictional, it is, like I said, semi-autobiographical. All the major instances in the book and incidents are either something we experienced firsthand or knew of through other people. So it's one of those things where the truth really can be stranger than fiction. I think it does speak volumes to those who have transitioned out of faith and walked away on their own as individuals. And I hate to, well, don't want to hate to say it, but the book could almost be used as a recruiting tool for the religious fence sitters who aren't sure, should I stay, should I go? And my wife and I are members of the ex-Mormon community here in the United States, and we do have people within the organization who think we should be more active in going door to door in Utah trying to recruit Mormons out of the church. That idea was actually presented at a conference, and we had to say, no, that's not in our charter. We would lose our, tax-exempt status? So, yeah. In fact, I have to listen to my wife on that because she is the recent past treasurer of the Ex-Mormon Foundation for 4 years. So she knows all the rules of what we can and what we can't do. However, quote, take from a little bit of Paula Poundstone. It would be kind of interesting on a Sunday to you follow behind the JWs and the Mormons a block or so, and you watch the houses they go up to, and then I go up there and knock on the door and hand the person a copy of my book and say, there is no word. So, but I haven't pulled that one off yet. This morning, what I'd like to do is keep this very informal and to make sure nothing kind of gets lost along the way while I'm yammering. If you have any questions, comments, nasty remarks, as my old psychology professor used to say, please raise your hand and we'll discuss the matter, answer the question right out of the chute. And let's see, of course, Laura is our microphone person, and we'll go ahead and take it from there. I do have a question. Well, actually, it's going to be two questions. Number one, do we have any ex-Mormons in here? Okay, when I spoke to the San Francisco atheist earlier this year, I think we had, what, 2 or 3? Mm-hmm. And also curious, how many people do have, I guess you would say, a religious background? You were raised in a faith and decided, no, this isn't going to work for me. So it looks like about a third or a half. Okay, so definitely bring your experiences, questions about that here. So anyway, it's the book is kind of represents a bit of, and I'm going to tell you a bit of essentially how we got here, got to this point in time. It does reflect 7 years we spent as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, conventionally known as the Mormons. We joined in early 1978. We left almost 7 years to the week in 1985. Mickey often asks, did we break a mirror somewhere along the line? We haven't figured that out, but it also coincided with the time when I was serving on active duty with the Air Force. So we had a couple of authoritarian institutions influencing our life for several years there. I see a nod there. Okay. Yeah. Question? Okay. Like I say, anytime somebody wants to throw something in, please do so. Prior to our conversion to Mormonism, we were what I would call minimally active Catholics. Mickey more inclined to attend Mass than I was, but we did go 2 or 3 times a month, I think, on average, but that was it. That was it. And then while we were stationed in West Germany, the Ramstein Air Base, which is still active, a lot of folks coming to and from Iraq and Afghanistan pass through there. That area for the Landstuhl Hospital. We were stationed at Ramstein, and we incurred a family crisis where at first we were concerned our daughter had, what's that, osteomyelitis, which is a form of bone cancer, am I correct? And so that was pretty terrifying. Then we spent a few days not knowing which way things would fall. Good news, bad news, she was finally evaluated as having juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. Not fatal, but very painful, very debilitating. And here we were, 8,000 miles away from our family in California, in an environment that really was not really family friendly. I don't care what the recruiters will tell you. And we were quite alone at the time. Now, Mickey was working over at the Landstuhl Hospital as a volunteer in the radiology department, and one of the people over there was an LDS convert himself, as was his wife. And they got to chatting because both of us, when we were in high school some years prior to this, we had contact with Mormon students, people we went to school with. And the association was never negative for us with these people. It was always positive. They were always friendly. I don't know if Mickey was ever recruited by her friends. Kind of, sort of, yeah. And but I was kind of actively recruited and was chatted up. But 18, 19, 20 years old, I begged off and said no, kind of went on with my life. You think I would have learned then? Anyway, so there we are, and got to talking with the guy at the hospital, and Mickey mentioned what he had said, the sense of community that the LDS Church has to offer, so forth and so on. And we started taking the lessons because it was a classic case of desperate times requiring desperate measures. And so we were looking for family, we were looking for a support group, and that was the draw. Let me get a little minute here. One of the things, one of the big sales pitches for the LDS Church, especially for people like us, was that, like many religions, they do believe in the positive effects of what you might call, well, what the LDS Church calls them health blessings, by their, by the people in authority within the church that essentially they act on the behalf of divine authority to bless the person affected so that that person might have better health. And I look back on it now, I think about it, and I think, what on earth was I thinking? But again, desperate times led to desperate measures. And within a matter of weeks, we had converted to the LDS Church, and we began a 7-year tour of very intense activity. During the 7 years, the church did get a lot of work out of us. They got a fair amount of cash too. The LDS Church, if you want to be a full member in good standing, I'm not sure how many folks know this, but you are required to pay, I'm seeing a nod of a head back here, 10% of your gross income to the church as their, tithing. And that can be a chunk of change. It can be a chunk of your percentage, particularly for folks who don't have that much money to spare. So the church did get a lot out of us in 7 years. Our daughter had several health blessings, and she got nothing. So with the passage of time, the LDS Church did make more and more demands of us. And we found ourselves kind of backing away. A few experiences we had near the end was, at one point in time, I was a clerk in one of the congregations. And the nice thing about that is you really know all the dirt on people. I found out that our daughter's Sunday school teacher because I did the math, because I knew when everybody got married and when they got divorced and when they died, when they had kids. Our daughter's Sunday school teacher was a devout Mormon who became impregnated by a non-Mormon, had to get married, blah, 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 and then subsequently he joined the Mormon church. So, they're not all nice and neat and wrapped up in a little bow. So anyway, in this one particular instance, as a clerk, I was asked to sit in on a what they call a court of love, and which is essentially a punitive gathering, and the people who are running the congregation typically, let's see, they call that a ward bishop, right? Yeah. Ward is a congregation, and the bishop is over the ward, and he has 2 assistants and the clerk. And apparently one young man in our ward in Arizona, this was in the last 12, 18 months that we were members, he was a returned missionary, and he had been married. He married a non-member, so he didn't get to have a temple marriage. And prior to his civil marriage to this young woman, they had had sexual relations, apparently on 1 or 2, 3 occasions. And he at some point in time after their marriage felt compelled to confess this to the bishop. And of course, being a convert, I was, almost 30 years old when I converted. I'm thinking, what's the big deal? But these people just went bonkers. He was called into this court of love, and he was kind of put over the coals. And one of the bishop's counselors, well, he was kind of a cranky guy, and he wanted the kid excommunicated from the church. And I just said, well, I don't think that's right. That's a lot of punishment for a relatively minor transaction. I was informed that that was not a minor transaction. Sorry, brother. So anyway, we went back and forth, and I pointed out that, well, his wife is a non-member, and if you want any chance of converting her to the LDS Church, and you excommunicate him over this relatively minor issue, there's no way she's ever going to join the church, and he may never come back. So we went back and forth for a little bit longer, and then they decided to what they call disfellowship him for a year. So it's a little bit less punitive than being excommunicated, but it's still not a good thing. And so my being on the track to ever become a bishop was a...
Quick question. Do you get your 10%?
Oh, hang on. Yes, microphone, please.
Microphone ruined the timing, but I'm just curious if during that year, do you still pay your 10% when you're
Yes.
disfellowed?
Oh, you betcha.
Okay, that seems patently unfair.
Oh, you have no idea how many things are patently unfair in this church. But let's go back, touch on tithing for a bit. The LDS Church has their temples. Are people here familiar with LDS temples? Somewhat. Okay. They're kind of the ultimate clubhouse for Mormons. And you have to go through a temple recommend interview in order to get your temple recommend card, or ticket, if you will, in order to get into the temple to perform various ordinances, take part in activities, et cetera, within the temple. I would like to quash any rumors you may have heard that there are orgies going on in LDS temples, because if there were, we'd still be members. So anyway, you have to go ahead. She's going to go, oh gosh, why did I come here today? You know I'm a loose cannon. I love you, dear. So anyway, in order to go to the temple, you have to answer a variety of questions. And the first question the bishop always asks you is, are you a full tithe payer? If the answer is no, you aren't even going to be asked the other questions. So I don't have a board here. Anyway, so yeah, money is a major issue within the LDS Church from soup to nuts.
Did they just take your word for it, or if you had said yes, would they go look you up?
Perfect question, thank you. They can. On occasion, people have been asked to bring in their W-2s. Yes. Oh, yeah. And, another little tale. There's an individual in the ex-Mormon community, let's call him Bill, and Bill used to work for the Church Education Service somewhere in Utah, not in Utah, in Idaho. And so he's working for the church, and so the church is paying his salary, and the church knows exactly how much money he makes. But Bill was a convert in his late teens, and he was kind of running out of steam as a believer. But then if he didn't believe anymore and didn't pay his tithing, didn't have his temple recommend, he wouldn't have a job, because the LDS Church would fire him from his church education system service position immediately upon losing his temple recommend. But for some reason, for a long time, he got away with, he paid tithing only on his net, not his gross. And finally, it caught up with him, and the church said, well, if you want to get your recommend, keep your job, blah, 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 you have to make back payments. You have to catch up. He wasn't too crazy about that. And by this time, his wife was done. I mean, the only reason she was tolerating him being an LDS member was because it was their way of earning, bringing in a living. Well, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Bill said, no, I'm not going to do this. So he lost his temple recommend, he lost his job, et cetera, et cetera. And, but life went on. He's now a very happy, successful person. He's got a PhD in something, so he's doing very well. And essentially, the nice thing, if you're an LDS member, full tithe payer, and you quit the LDS church, you instantly get a 10% raise in pay. I mean, next paycheck comes along after you leave the church, you go, oh, I don't have to give 10% to the church. So that goes to us. And the LDS church also does have other financial expectations of its members. They like you to donate to the building fund, the fast and testimony fund, the missionary fund, the fund to fund. And we have another question, and the microphone is coming up.
Where does all this damn money go? I mean, is it like Scientology? I mean, is it all floating up to the top people? I mean, who do they give their 10% to?
Actually, that's interesting. There are people, most of the LDS church clergy, if you will, are lay people, unpaid lay people. However, as you start to move up the pyramid, people do start to get paid for certain things. They get reimbursed for certain expenses, et cetera, until you reach, the very top echelon. And these people are pulling, this is their full-time job now. They are senior officers, if you will, in the LDS church. There's the president of the church, his counselors, the 12 this, the 70 that. So there are probably a few thousand people at the top who are pulling down money. And when the church pays them, of course, they have to take 10% of that and turn around and give it back to the church. Now, where is that going? I'm not entirely sure. I think a lot of it goes to build temples, to build buildings, et cetera, et cetera. It is not a charity. The LDS Church is not a charity, but then most religions are not charities.
It's technically nonprofit.
Okay, to repeat his question in case it was missed.
Is it
Yeah.
technically nonprofit?
Technically, the LDS Church is a non-profit organization, as are pretty much all religions. The various churches worldwide are sitting on tons of money. They own businesses. I'll let the mic get to this gentleman, and then we'll go on. But yeah, the LDS Church, if you Google what businesses does the LDS Church own, sit down at your computer and bring a lunch. You're going to be there a while. Sir.
I was at the Atheist meeting in Utah last few months ago, and I walked down to their visiting center. Well, I mean, that's another story. I think what I learned, and I don't know if it's true, but they told me there's a whole shopping mall. It's a beautiful shopping mall that's actually owned by the church.
Oh, the Jesus Mall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not for profit?
Oh, yes, it is. Oh, yeah, yeah. In fact, the ex-Mormons, the ex-Mormon Foundation, of which we are members, they hold their annual conference in Salt Lake City, and we poke fun at the mall over there by the temple, and we call it the Jesus Mall. And there are some people who got upset with us because Mickey and I have gone to the Jesus Mall. Number one, because we're both diabetic. It's the only place in Salt Lake City practically you can get sugar-free chocolate. So we go there. And they have a cheesecake factory, which is pretty nice too. So yeah, we're giving a little bit money back to the church, et cetera, et cetera. But if you go visit in Utah, there's no way you can spend money without some of that money eventually finding its way to the LDS Church. And before I forget, you said you were back in Salt Lake City for the Atheists. Did you happen to run into a woman named Susan Fink? Okay, just asking. She's with the San Francisco Atheist Group, and we know her through the ex-Mormons because she has Mormon relatives. Anyway. So, but again, you can see the,
is it still true that they own Marriott's? Yeah, a very huge chain. They make a lot of money.
Yeah,
anyway.
Marriott is LDS held, confirming that with my better half because I always lose track of that. And this is also kind of funny. I love it when things come around. The Marriott, I don't think they do it anymore, but I believe they used to have pay-per-view adult options on the TV, even though they were affiliated with the LDS Church. So go figure. Think about that, folks. Okay. Any other questions to this point in time? This is what I like about this presentation. People start thinking. So, anyway. Oh, excellent.
I was just curious when you said the Jesus Mall, and I was thinking, isn't that the wrong prophet?
Yeah, actually, I personally, and this is where I have, okay, I'm going to cross the line a little bit on Mormon bashing, but it is legal, it's technically called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I personally refer to it as the Church of Joseph Smith of the Latter-day Scams. And on all the S's, they should be dollar marks, because I've never personally encountered a religion that is so tied to money. When I was a kid, I was raised nominal Presbyterian. We had our time as Catholics, but never have I seen the asking for money, the money-centric culture. And it's a money-centric culture in the LDS Church, whether they will admit it or not. And tiptoeing through the minefield. By the time the mic gets to him, we'll move on. But the candidacy of Mitt Romney is a case in point. Mitt Romney and his family are what are often referred to as church royalty. And that's because, number one, they're rich. And that's the only reason. But the LDS Church, the culture, the dominant culture mindset is that people in the church who have money are blessed by God. People who don't have as much money are somehow less blessed by God. Now, you will never hear that as official doctrine from the mucky mucks, but that mindset is very strongly imbued, I'm using the right word, anyway, entrenched, shall we say, in the LDS Church. When I was in the Air Force, I quickly noticed that all the senior positions in the church in Germany, because we're mostly military members there, were occupied by commissioned officers. And the lower positions were occupied by the enlisted men. And you can associate that with money, social status, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, yes, sir.
The other religion, in quotes, that really seems to fit this description is Scientology. I don't know if you know anything about that, but they also have a very high focus on money. And they're also a very recent religion, obviously, even more recent than LDS. So my question for you is, LDS was founded less than 200 years ago, correct?
Correct, yes. About 1830, 1840.
Yeah. And it was based on the idea that there are actual miracles that occurred with the golden tablets and all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And you and your wife seem very intelligent. And I'm sorry, I don't know how else to put this, but it's sort of a what were you thinking question, like did the logical part of your brain ever sort of question some of the tenets of the church? This is the thing I really don't understand about a lot of religions.
In other words, how do we get hoodwinked?
Well, it's not so much hoodwinked.
How did you get out? How did you get in and how did you get out?
Well, right, but my question is focused on sort of what is the mental process by which the sort of the rational, sort of detective part of your brain must somehow get suppressed in the process of being drawn into these religions. And I mean this seriously.
Right. Oh yeah, I understand perfectly.
I don't mean it to be insulting.
Oh
because
no, not at
obviously
all.
Billions of people,
oh, absolutely.
have this experience. It's a little different, I think, when you're raised, Catholic when you're 4 or 5 and you're indoctrinated, mm-hmm. whereas coming in at a later age. I'm just curious how that mental process goes.
Like I mentioned before, for us, it was a response to the severe medical crisis of our daughter, distance from home. We had no emotional infrastructure over in Germany. Like I said, desperate times ended up yielding desperate measures. But by the same token, as our daughter got better, she went into remission. We came back to the States. When we came back to the States, we started associating with more and more with non-LDS people, especially when we lived on a military base. So we had our circle of exposure became wider. And finally, we were stationed in Arizona, which was closer to our homes our family homes in California, even though we didn't see them all the time. So the dynamics had changed by the time we left. And at that point in time, you do start to question things and go, okay, what are we doing here? What are we getting out of this? And they're wanting more and more, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, we were trying to give it the old college try, and this just isn't working anymore. I'm really not sure why. We're not really sure why. What can we do to make, you're almost, it got to this point where your feet were growing too big for your shoes, and yet you were trying to still force your feet into these smaller shoes, and it just wasn't working. And finally the straw that, it broke the camel's back and was our last effort, was back in the 60s and 70s. The LDS Church had a program called, I believe it was just the Indian Placement Program, essentially. And essentially what would happen is the LDS Church would send their missionaries, et cetera, to the primarily Navajo reservations in northern Arizona. And they would get these youngsters baptized. And within 24 hours, the youngsters were on a bus headed to cities in primarily Utah and Arizona to be essentially foster children with LDS families, to give them the opportunity to, number one, learn the faith, and number two, to just give them better educational opportunities and social opportunities, so forth and so on. And our last major college try, if you will, was to take in one of these youngsters for, let's see, that would have been 1984, was it? He came to us shortly around Labor Day to start the school year in September of 1984. Oh gosh, it just didn't work. The child, he was not a bad child, not an evil child. He never did. How old was the question? He was 10 at the time. He was the same age as our son. But he never really acclimated to living in a larger environment, and I don't blame him for anything, for essentially the failure of the experiment, if you will. I blame the LDS Church because they shouldn't have been doing this in the first place. We lived on base at the time. There were two other families in our ward who lived on base. They also took in Native American children. Each family brought in a girl because they had primarily girls in their household. And by Christmas of that year, I mean less than 100 days after each of the children arrived, when they went home for Christmas, they didn't come back. And all three families that was the best Christmas present we ever had. It just didn't work. You talk about force-fitting people into molds they don't fit. It not only went for us, but it went for the child as well. And the child's family. That's got to be tough, turning your child over to foster care like that. I'm glad everybody is sitting down because I just shake my head every time I hear this. And you can read it. It's online if you do enough Googling. There were actually people in the LDS Church who believed and would swear to you on the Book of Mormon that after a child had been with of course it would be a white family for a given amount of time, the darkness of the Native American skin of the child would begin to grow lighter. Oh yeah. Digest that one. Yeah, wrap your brain around that. Fortunately for all concerned, the program was discontinued, I think, within 5 years after we left the church. We were out of the church within 90 days after the child didn't come back after Christmas vacation. Things went that quickly. They unraveled. But this is the kind of thing that a lot of people bought into. Now, personally, we were at the point in time where when we took this child in, at that point in time, we really weren't that concerned about his spirituality. We thought, this is a chance to do a good thing. You've got a kid who's up on this reservation, not getting a good education. We'll bring him into our home. We'll make sure he eats, nutritious foods, has a positive environment, it's safe, he can go to school, but it just still didn't work. And we have a question.
Thank you. I was just wondering what you meant by maybe some of the specifics of why it didn't work. I mean, the children just didn't want to go to school, or they didn't want to go to church services, or...
Oh, nobody wants to go to church.
What was happening, why didn't it work?
It didn't, well, number one, cultural incompatibilities. A young Native American child raised on the reservation just doesn't come to the LDS world in a major city and be quickly adaptable. One of the things that happened was, apparently on the reservation, a lot of these youngsters, if they show up for school for a month without missing a day, it's a big deal, and they get awards and recognitions, et cetera, et cetera. The elementary school our children attended, as well as Brian, the youth in question here, they had a contest for something to do with the fire department. It was a posters for the fire department, and our daughter took second prize. And Brian, the kid who was with us, he like most of the kids, didn't get anything. He was livid. I mean, he couldn't understand. Why didn't I get something? I deserve recognition. But that was the value system with which he had been raised on the reservation. And so you had that level of incompatibility. And when you talk about going to church, that's demand. That's a demand for any child. It's a demand for a lot of adults, especially the LDS church. I'm not sure how many folks are familiar with this system, but when you go to church in the LDS church, it's a 3-hour block. So it's broken up into 3 45-minute or 1-hour blocks. And by the time it's over, I don't care if anybody says my brain was fried on some days. So, but like I said, the reason it didn't work was just cultural incompatibility. Sir.
I want to say something about highly intelligent people believing in something that's nonsense. I was raised Roman Catholic. And I was very good at logic and mathematics. See, I was a math whiz. I eventually had a PhD in math, but I was 21 before I left the church. And what the Roman Catholic Church is saying is that God knows everything. He created you. He knew what you were going to do because he knows everything. And when you do what he knew you were going to do, he might send you to hell for all eternity. That is just totally crazy. Yeah. How could I have believed that, stayed Catholic for so long? And I'm not the only one. I had colleagues, math professors who were Christian, and I had some conversations with them. Highly intelligent people can, I think this is true of anybody. I don't think there's exceptions. You can be highly intelligent, be very rational, but in some domain, it could be political or religious. You may have some crazy idea and you just don't see it.
Right. And
by the way, Isaac Newton, one of the greatest physicists of all time, was Christian. Galileo was Catholic. So I had colleagues who were Roman Catholic, good at logic. Yeah. And we all have blind spots. We get ego attached when you're brought up to something. Yeah. I was arguing with atheists when I was in college, and I felt like I was losing the argument.
You probably were.
So I finally gave it up. I decided they were right.
Yeah, yeah. Along those lines, you talk about being raised in a given culture like that. When you look at the LDS culture, especially if you're living in Utah, some of the more, say, a smaller town, off the beaten path where everybody belongs to the LDS church, or in a place like Provo where Brigham Young University is, you're just constantly reinforced that this is the right way. And if you attempt to essentially leave the tribe. You are threatened, for want of a better word, it's still a threat, with loss of contact with family, with friends. You may lose your job. We've known people, been associated with people in the LDS Church who would not let their children play with other children who came from non-LDS families. It's just amazing. Of course, I told you about the guy who lost his job because he didn't pay his full tithing. And then people will stop speaking to you. And it was really kind of funny when, we're down to we're getting on to 15 minutes here, so I'm going to hold something in abeyance for right now, but did anybody have a next follow-on question? Yes?
So I think what I hear from what you're saying is, well, for me what I hear is that emotions trump reason. When we're in a peer group, when we're in an environment, as you were in Germany,
yes,
your emotional needs trump your reason, right?
Yes.
Which I get, and now you're back and you're at an emotional distance from that peer group and the need for that support. You can be more rational, and we can stand here at a distance and criticize all the ridiculous things that Mormons believe or that Mormons may do.
Yes.
I mean, but I get that. But then you can look at us in America here now, and for example, the way we're all eating meat. I mean, most of us here can't possibly deny the harm that that's causing to many animals when we eat meat. But the peer group accepts it, and we all do it, so most of us just deal with that dissonance.
Right.
Most of us here are burning CO2 at rates that are 5, 10, 20, 25 times that of other countries, and again, well, everybody else does it. Most of us could not, reasonable scientific people could not deny that's going to seriously harm the future lives of the human race, but we do it. Yep. So I get the fact that when you're in a peer group, emotions trump reason, and there's millions of people like that are Mormons, and frankly, many religious people around the world living in subsistence could look at the Americans and go, look, they're killing our future with their CO2, and look what they're doing to animals. I get it's easy to find these things and criticize at a distance. I guess my question is, so what's the point here? What do we do about all this? What's the goal here apart from highlighting a lot of the weaknesses, which people could do to us too, right?
Oh, yeah. I think it kind of, hopefully it would give all of us an opportunity from time to time to step back from the emotional and try to embrace the rational a bit more. You talked about the CO2 consumption, et cetera, so generation. We personally have made decisions over the past couple of years to try, we've thought about that. We just haven't gone along with the crowd. So we've tried to think about that as a couple, a household, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, now we have solar, for us personally, we have solar electric, which we feed out to PG&E and then we buy their processed stuff, but pretty much it's a wash. We have a solar water heater, so we're consuming less gas. We have gone to water harvesting tanks. We have about a 4,000 gallon capacity for the house. It's used to supplement yard watering. And we drive a Prius. I could I could make comments, et cetera, but we like I said, we've tried to step back as individuals, and we all have to make that choice. Yes, ma'am.
I just, follow on to what he just asked, is I'm just thinking, I think, at least from my experience, it has a lot also to do with emotional pain. It's not just about being around a peer group, but it's if you're isolated, you have no one else to talk to. I mean, I think probably most of us here have been in these various situations. You can be very vulnerable to various ideas. If someone's going to come and offer you friendship, and it happens to be tied to this other organization, you know what, you're going to take the friendship and you're going to just tolerate, and then maybe you grow into it and you kind of doubt it. You don't really see it the same way to start with, and it just kind of snowballs from there. But it comes more from, at least a lot of it, I think, comes, like you were in pain. Yes. You were in emotional pain, and that's how you addressed it.
And when we moved back to the States from Germany, I personally, I'm not sure if my wife was the same way, but I became more and more what I call a buffet believer. And I said, oh, yeah, this sounds like, brothers and sisters, you should be planting a garden, blah, 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 blah. I said, well, that's a good idea. It's a nice, helpful hobby, blah, blah, blah. And so we planted garden. There were a lot of other things we did that were good to do that happened to coincide with what the LDS Church recommended. If they, of course, pretty soon, the giving of 10% really didn't make too much sense. So we quit doing that, got out. Sir?
Yeah, I was wondering, after you left the LDS, you rejoined the Catholic Church. And I'm curious about, well, I can understand going back to your old church, but I'm curious about what how you left that. And also, you agreed to leave at the same time, so I gather there was a lot of communication about it.
I hope so.
Enough.
Did we miss something? Actually, Mickey was Catholic. She converted to Catholicism before we had met, and when we joined the LDS Church and left, we were not religiously active. A few years, no, several years, almost 10 probably, after we left the LDS Church, the kids had grown and left the house, she felt a spiritual need and started to gravitate back to the Catholic Church. And I went, with her. We both attended, et cetera, et cetera. Again, we weren't very active, but there were times when it was almost philosophical in nature when you would go to Mass and the presentation, I guess you would call it, when the priest would give the, I can't think of the word, sermon. Yes, thank you. It made a lot of sense. It could be very, very calming, especially living in Silicon Valley and working in high tech. Things get a little hectic. So yeah, it had its moments. Although I wasn't, me personally, I wasn't an active, oh, God's going to come any time now type of thing. Although I do have some Catholic relatives like that. What broke the camel's back for us in the Catholic Church was the expose of the sexual abuse and rape of children by priests, and probably even more horrifically, or at least as horrifically, the cover-up of these atrocities by senior people at high level in the Catholic Church. This was unacceptable, and we were gone. Yeah. And at that point in time, well, wait a minute, we left the Mormons because we figured out it was Codswall up there. We left the Catholic Church because they were hiding, all this criminal behavior. And you sit and think, does any of this make any sense from anybody? And the conclusion was no. And so we drifted in, we gravitated to atheism. Sir?
Yes, what I was wanting to know is, you talk about atheism as if it's a destination, as opposed to, atheism is really about nothing ultimately. And I'm wondering if, you were talking about what attracted you to the various churches was the community, and does the reality-based world need to have a community to attract people to, so that they don't end up in churches because there isn't any other place to go to get that kind of community?
Yeah,
like this.
Yeah, like this. Yeah, okay. Essentially you have a common interest group. One of the ways I got in touch with this group was through meetup.com. And you go on Meetup, and there are all kinds of interest groups. People like to travel, people like to read, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're going, say Catholicism more so than Mormonism, the common bond there between people is their church, and some are more active than others. So that's one way of meeting people. But then it does ask a lot more of you. These churches ask a lot more of you. If you want to be a full-fledged member of the club, then you have to believe this. And if you want to become a less full-fledged member, well, you can go to the B side, if you will, and believe this. For folks, special interest groups, like I said, travel, book clubs, et cetera, your common interest is an activity. And yeah, it can grow from that. You can meet people and do, we belong to a book club, and one of the other, well, actually, one of the women in the club, she and her husband, we get along pretty well, and we'll meet them once in a while for dinner. Mickey will get together with the wife for lunch. We have other people associated with the book club as well, and we start a little informal movie night. We get together anywhere from 3 to 4 times a year. We run a movie at our house with dinner. So yeah, you have these associations, essentially common interests. So yeah. Hopefully I've answered your questions. I'm not sure.
You're finding in the secular world what you had in the religious.
Let's get. Why don't you go ahead with the mic and repeat that?
Yeah. So you find in the secular world what you had in the religious world as far as the community. Is that what you're saying?
To a degree, yes. It's not quite as close, but then it's not as demanding either. Ma'am.
Well, one of the things the churches often do or usually do is provide for family. It's not just the couple, it's the whole family.
Right.
And so one of the things I wondered is, how did your children handle this switching from one church to another and one community to another and eventually to atheism?
Let's see. They really, it seemed almost transparent to them when we left the LDS church. I think they were glad not to have to be bothered with that, especially at that young age. Both our son and our daughter showed tendencies, especially our daughter, oh dear heavens, showed tendencies of social nonconformity, that independence, if you will, that would not have worked well for them as lifelong members of the LDS church. Our daughter would never get a temple recommend. You know it's true.
Okay, so is there another community? Does she need a community? How did you provide for a community for your children if it wasn't the LDS church?
For our kids, it was mostly other kids they met in school. And they had common activities. Our daughter went into girls softball for a couple of years. She was in jazz band. She was in theater tech. Our son was a bit more of a loner, so that wasn't as big a deal for him. But they've both grown into very competent, rational, stable adults.
Are they atheists?
Our daughter is definitely an openly declared atheist. I believe our son is, but I don't think he's ever formally said anything. He and his then fiance were married about 1.5 years ago in a secular ceremony performed by my cousin, who is a retired priest. And he was willing to do this. Great guy.
Years ago, I read a book by one of the wives of Brigham Young. I think it's the title of the book was Wife Number 15. And I wondered do you have any idea how they changed their viewpoints on sex? I mean, it seems to me that was a leader of the church and certainly established, a great portion of the church.
Yeah, I think we're losing you on the mic.
Oh, I don't have it up
there you go.
Close enough?
Yeah, the question was the perception of essentially polygamy in the church.
Well, and how you understood it. Did you not understand none of these things before you actually came to the church?
I was aware of the church's history of polygamy, yes. The church did formally give up polygamy in the 1890s, although there were a lot of adherents into the 1920s, 1930s. A lot of them moved to Mexico, and there are still enclaves now where polygamy exists. Sister Wives is the program, et cetera, et cetera. Interestingly enough, even though the LDS Church, the main branch of the LDS Church, says no to polygamy in this world, polygamy in the afterlife is a functional element of LDS dogma to this day. And a lot of people are not aware of that. We are going to be running short of time. Let's have one more question.
I'd like to know about your book.
Oh, good. I'm glad you asked, because that's why I was going to cut the time short. Let's see, the book. It's called Dark Deception, and it's available today for $10, signed, That's my cost. And one of the reasons I tried to keep the cost down both for electronic and hard copy is it came out about 1.5 years ago, actually, on the heels of the Great Recession. And a lot of folks didn't have a lot of disposable income. And I quickly found that a lot of very bright people who like to read were teachers and so forth, and they really don't have a lot of disposable income. So I kept the price down to $10 or less. And if you're interested, I have several copies here today. So if you want to, catch me. I'll sell you one. I'll sign it. Also, if you're not interested right now, I do have cards. In fact, if you buy a book, take one. It makes a dandy little bookmark. And it tells how you can get a hold of me, as well as check the book out primarily on Amazon. That's where most of the information is, but it's available through other outlets. And this is amazing, because last time I made this presentation, I got halfway through my shtick. This time I made it less than 1/3 of the way. And I'd like to thank you for that, because hopefully it's been very informative to you.
We do still have a few minutes, so we can either,
okay,
however you want to spend that.
Okay. Okay. While the book is fictional, essentially it centers around women, actually. I started to write the book, and based on our LDS experiences. And I thought, well, the LDS church is a Mormon male-dominated church. I need to write about the guys. And I started writing about these 3 guys. One was a convert. One was a younger. Actually, there were two were converts, and one was a middle-aged, established person in the LDS church, or in this church, fictional church. And after about a chapter and a half, I had brought in the wives from time to time, and I have no idea how. I really don't know how it happened, but the wives quickly became more interesting than their husbands, and I thought, why fight it? So the book, actually, the primary protagonist through the first 1/3 to actually 1/2 of the book is what I call a spirited young college girl, who essentially she kind of breaks the rules, and as part of her antics, she draws I guess leads are connected to the women who are married to these 3 guys. And one woman is probably in her mid-late 20s. Another one is in her late 40s, early 50s. She and her husband are empty nesters. And that couple are also converts. And the 3rd woman is a lifelong member of the church, and she and her husband never had any children. And you'll find a very interesting reason for that as you get towards the end of the book. But essentially it describes a lot of the experiences, trials, turmoils that these women go through and the people they're associated with go through. And as I said before, all the major incidents in this book are fictionalized versions of things that had happened in real life that I've been aware of as a member of the LDS Church. Yes?
I just want to say I appreciate the compassionate way that you told this story. And I'm just wondering why you maybe have chosen to tell it this way, given that it can be a contentious topic.
It can be contentious because I think, especially me, if you start to let your emotions get away from you, you become a negative ranter. Like I said, my wife and I are members of the ex-Mormon community, both here locally in the San Francisco Bay Area and nationwide through the Ex-Mormon Foundation. And there are a lot of people with a lot of bitterness, but these are people who have lost a lot more. When they left the church, marriages have been destroyed, child custody issues, grandparents are no longer allowed to talk to their grandchildren. It's just amazing. It's almost in some instances, when a person leaves the LDS Church, for some of these people and their families, the person who leaves becomes an apostate and becomes almost dead to the family that remains behind in the LDS Church. Apostasy is not a welcome act.
We do have a couple more minutes. I'm looking over if there's any more questions. Would anybody? Oh, I see.
One question, and then if I have time, I'm going to tell you a little funny story.
All right, let me get someone who hasn't asked a question yet.
Am I right in understanding that the Mormon Church doesn't let blacks into the... it has several categories of membership, or...
Actually, along those lines, I think back shortly after we joined, actually, 78 or so, blacks were actually permitted now to have full membership and status, technically speaking, within the LDS Church, which meant black men could hold the LDS priesthood. If they met all the requirements, they could go to the temple. If they were, in fact, I've seen black African American women as missionaries, so they're able to go to the temple as well. How well they are accepted generally throughout the LDS Church, I don't know. There's still a very, very small percentage of Latter-day Saints are black. I think there was one more question that didn't get... Yes, one more.
Well, I actually wasn't going to talk about this, but one thing I did want to say that I had an easier time of questioning the church, because I was one generation away from Irish Catholic and on both sides of the family. Mm-hmm. And my father was severely beaten by his maiden aunts, two of them, and he hated them and hated the church, so he was a lifelong atheist, bitter as he could be. My mother was from there was Catholic in the family, but the whole Irish rebellion was in my family, Orangemen versus Green. Okay.
Right.
So there was the criticism of the church right there. So when I started as a young kid, about 6 or 7, because I was lonely and didn't have any place to go, even at school they couldn't start me. So I started investigating the churches in our small community in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And probably the place where I really got turned off was when I saw my first Easter celebration in a fairly, let's say, high-level church like the Episcopal, where they had the crucifix.
Yes.
And all of that. And to just see that, and then also find out that the Holy Family had no mother. There was a Holy Ghost. Mm-hmm. So what's that?
Yep.
Where's Mom? And so I really started to think this thing over, and I realized, women have no place in this religion. And that's what turned me off. Then I went from there.
There's been a major upheaval recently within the LDS Church about a woman who wanted to have priesthood for women. Excuse me, Laura, real quick. Mickey, can I ask you to comment on the woman who was excommunicated because of her activity? You know more about that than I do. But a woman was recently excommunicated because of her attempts to have women become priests within the LDS Church.
Her name was Kate Kelly, and she was the founder of a group called Ordained Women. And she was hoping to, as a group, bring the topic to the brethren and have them prayerfully go to God and receive revelation that women could then be ordained to the priesthood, as they originally were in Joseph Smith's time when he founded the church. She was, as you can tell, instantly shut down, and she was excommunicated from the church in a very public trial in a ward she no longer lived in. So she was in one state, and they held the Church Court of Love clear across the United States in another, so that she couldn't actually be there.
Thank you.